Bert Kreischer's Fully Loaded Comedy Festival. Bert Kreischer, for those who may not know, is a great stand-up comedian, a headlining comic, and one of my favorite podcasters. Definitely one of my favorite recurring Rogan guests. And he has a couple podcasts of his own, including the Bertcast and Two Bears, One Cave, which he does with his best friend, Tom Segura. Another great top-tier headlining comic, whose book I just finished reading, by the way, that I'll tell you guys about once I do that breakdown in a future free writing session episode. But Bert, for the uninitiated, he is the life of the party, known as like the party animal drinker. He went to Florida State University. He was like a frat guy and was in college for like 6 or 7 years. And the Rolling Stone magazine actually did a article about him being the country's like quote unquote biggest party animal. And that Rolling Stone article is what inspired the Van Wilder movie with Ryan Reynolds. And as the story goes, he, was a working comic, famously told his story on Rogan about hanging out with the Russian mob when going on a school trip for the Russian class that he was taking in college, now known as the Machine Story. Rogan on that podcast convinces him to start telling that story on stage and developing it. Bert at the time doesn't think it's really a stage story, but at a future performance of his, a fellow Rogan listener in the front row tells him, "Yo, tell us the Machine Story that Joe told you to develop and work on." And he was like, "No, I'm not going to tell that story, guys." And a couple of the fans in the front row convince him to and say, "Hey, we know it's not going to be good. Just start telling it because that's how it's going to get good." Then that story, that bit, for better or worse, blew the fuck up to the point where in each and every one of his stand-up shows, the fans damn near demand it. And he has to do it as like at least an encore if he doesn't work it into his set. Then fast forward to today, 2023, a multi-million-dollar budgeted, I think it was like $30 or $40 million budgeted film was created starring Bert around this Machine Story. And I just love like the arc of that, especially since I was listening live back in the day when he initially first told that story on Rogan. So to see it go from that to where it is now, it's fucking amazing to see. But anyway, I heard Bert was doing this comedy festival. Obviously, I'm a comedy fan. I'm an even bigger podcast fan. And the first date of the festival is going to be in Forest Hill Stadium here in Queens, New York. Then I check out the lineup, which I'll tell you guys about in a bit, but it's essentially a podcast fan's wet dream. And it was here in Queens, so I definitely wanted to go. I just had to find someone to convince to go with me on a Wednesday night, on a school night, as they say. Thankfully, my best friend Steven, which is usually down to do anything, especially if it has to do with going out and drinking. Shout out to Steven, Spun Today alum as well. He agreed to go with me. We booked floor seat tickets and had an awesome time. Now, this took place in Forest Hill Stadium, which is here in Queens, like I said. But I had never been to Forest Hill Stadium. I had heard of it referenced in the past, but I didn't even know where it was. And I'm someone, born in Brooklyn, but raised and lived all my life in Queens. I had never seen the stadium. I had zero idea of where it was. Come to find out that it's in this neighborhood in Forest Hills that I always drive by. But it's just that the stadium is like smack in the center of a completely residential area. Like you literally cross the street from the stadium, it's like just houses all around, which is like the weirdest location for this thing, but awesome at the same time. I would definitely like to go back there. Now, it's not a dome, and unfortunately, the shows are rain or shine. Well, fortunately or unfortunately, I mean, it would take, I imagine, a lot of logistical heavy lifting if you started, canceling and switching up shows based on weather. But unfortunately, on this day, there were scattered thunderstorms. So when I'm on the way to the stadium, no rain, it's starting to clear up. It's a little cloudy. I park the car. I find parking, pretty much like 2 blocks away from the stadium, which was great. Then it starts raining. Drizzling at first, then stops, then starts raining again, then stops, then starts raining harder. At this point, I'm already like walking towards the stadium, waiting for Steven to meet me there. In front of the stadium, it starts a fucking torrential downpour. Everybody's like trying to huddle up under like a tent that was by the stadium. People were under trees. I was under one of the trees. It's just coming down, raining. We're like, fuck, it's gonna ruin the whole fucking event. But again, rain or shine, right? But you obviously don't want to be just sitting in the rain watching a fucking comedy show. Sounds like a miserable fucking experience. albeit a unique one, but still. And we go through security. It's still raining, still coming down. Scan the tickets on the phone. It's still raining, starting to let up a little bit. Then we literally pass security and scanning the tickets into like this area of like all the vendors, all the food vendors and drinks and stuff like that. The rain stops, and I shit you not, a fucking rainbow pops out. And then from there on out, it does not rain again for the rest of the event. And if I remember, I took a picture of the rainbow and shit. I'll post it on the webpage for this episode, which is at spuntoday.com/podcasts/236. And I'll add a couple other pictures as well for you guys to check out. But yo, check out this fucking lineup. And this is what like cherry on top of that like sold me. You had Shane Gillis, who just stole the fucking show. Shane Gillis is an absolute beast. You had Tiffany Haddish, which was awesome to see. She did seem, she hasn't been doing like too many like workout sets or anything like that. Not that she needs to. She's in like every other fucking comedy movie, but it was just like dope to see her. And I've always liked like Tiffany's energy, and just like her story is great as well. You have the OG GOAT, Dave Attell, which is fucking hilarious. And he's from Ozone Park, which I didn't know. I feel like I had heard that he was from Queens, but I had forgotten. And he shouted out Ozone Park, which was dope during his set. You had Big J motherfucking Okerson, which was hilarious as always. Oh, and circling back real quick to Shane Gillis, which is like best, most impeccable Trump impersonator on the face of the planet. That's not all he does, obviously, but when he breaks into a joke and uses a Trump impression, that's just like a cheat code. It like brings down the house. And he was famously, for those of you who don't know, quote unquote canceled for saying an Asian American joke or reference during one of his podcast episodes from back in the day. He actually got on to SNL, and he was like hired and fired like in the same week or something like that before he was actually able to do anything. But because it was like during the anti-Asian hate times, and somebody unearthed like him saying something about an Asian delivery guy on his podcast, just like shooting the shit with his boy, and then that got him canceled from SNL, which seemed to like everybody, especially like within the podcast community, like an overcorrection. But whatever. From there, Rogan brought him onto his podcast, and he's, the rest is history. He blew up from there. Big J Okerson, again, hilarious. Legion of Skanks podcast. Dan motherfucking Soder, which is one of my favorites. I believe he does the Bonfire podcast. He was on Legion of Skanks. He's definitely been a guest on Rogan, on Ari Shaffir's Skeptic Tank, which I think is where like I first learned about him. He plays Miffy on the show Billions on Showtime. He was great, definitely one of my favorites. You had Rosebud Baker, who was super funny. Carter Cruz, Cypher Sounds, which hosted the event, which was cool to see. He's just like a New York radio staple. And Shane Torres. And what was also dope is that you get to see like all these other lunatic fucking podcast fans, which made me feel less alone in the world. I had a dude sitting right to my left that he do such like nuanced references that he was like bringing up from the Two Bears One Cave podcast, which is Bert's and Tom Segura's. And I was like, oh shit, yeah, I'm not alone. And I knew exactly what he was like referencing the entire time. And this other dude that took off his shirt, because Bert famously does all his comedy without his shirt. There was a dude like in the row in front of us that took his shirt off in solidarity, I guess. But yeah, all that was cool to see. And Bert just put together a great festival, great show. His set was super funny. He did the machine story. There was this point in time in his set, and I forget how he segued into it, but where he just broke out and singing the national anthem, and every single body in the stadium was like singing along. I actually have a video of it. I'll post that as well on the website for you guys to check out. It was a really, really good time. If you guys have the opportunity, they are actively touring the festival, so it may be coming to a town near you. Again, it's Bert Kreischer's Fully Loaded Comedy Festival 2023. I'll link to it in the episode notes so you guys can check out the upcoming tour dates. And I believe each town that he's in, it's like a different set of folks. So here for the New York one, there's a lot of New York-based comics, but I'm sure you'll be able to enjoy a lot of other big names as he tours the rest of the country. Bert Kreischer's Fully Loaded Comedy Festival Tour. Check it out.